I'm Rachel Bishop, I'm Deputy Director for Internet Policy. So my team is responsible for the launch of a recent internet safety strategy that was published last month. I'm planning to take you through sort of three different aspects of the government's work on online safety. First of all, to give you a little bit of context around the drivers for bringing forward our strategy. Second of all, to give an overview of the strategy itself. And finally, to sort of place it within the context of the government's wider work on the digital environment, including the Digital Charter. So the Internet Safety Strategy is looking at sort of a lot of the issues that we've touched on already today, but in a much broader sense. So really looking at what we can do to make sort of online communities and environments safer for all users. And this was really driven by the starting point from my Secretary of State was that there's sort of, I think, a general acknowledgement that things that would not be acceptable for people to say on the street are increasingly acceptable to say on a computer screen. So that was really the kind of problem that she wanted to tackle here. My team has spent the last 11 months now looking at the various different work that's been done in this field, and our starting point was really considering the groundbreaking work that's been rolled out by the UK Council for Child Internet Safety, or UKIS, which I'm sure many of you will be aware of. They've produced a number of different documents around how to make online environments safer for children. For example, the social media guide, and a guide in terms of how schools can deal with issues, things like sexting. Within the UKIS community, there is an evidence working group, and we commissioned them at the very start of our work to produce an updated version of a literature review that considered how children were engaging with the online environment. This was conducted by Professor Sonia Livingston, Professor Julia Davidson, and Dr. Joanna Bryce, and was published alongside our internet safety strategy. And it's some of the points that came out in that literature review Lady Kidron mentioned in her annual address. So the findings that we found from that literature review was that sort of actually opportunities and risks are quite well balanced in terms of children's online engagement, that individuals tend to be vulnerable both offline and online, and that was a real sort of spark point for us in terms of this is not, people aren't just vulnerable in online communities, and that there's something that we need to be doing about a kind of real kind of holistic all-world approach to this, and that also that sort of as Lady Kidron mentioned, it's not so much. What's illustrative is not so much the length of time that children spend online, but actually the quality of what they're doing while they're online. Also, because we are the government, we did have to consider a lot about how government is working on online safety in general. We know that there's an awful lot of different pockets of work going on across government, and our strategy was an attempt to really bring that work together and to present a coherent individual approach to online safety. And in doing so, we drew very heavily on the Lords Communications Committee report, Growing Up Digital, and the Children's Commissioner report as well. So, having kicked off the piece of work in February, we conducted a number of roundtables with interested stakeholders. We spent the sort of next 6 months really going out, trying to talk to tech companies, charities, civil society, academics about what their input was, and we pulled that together to produce the strategy itself, which was published on the 11th of October alongside a consultation. So the strategy was based on three main principles. Firstly, what is unacceptable offline is unacceptable online. Secondly, all users should be empowered to manage online risks and stay safe. And thirdly, technology companies have a responsibility to their users. And those are the three principles that will continue to underpin our work going forward. The strategy considers the responsibilities of companies to their users, the use of technical solutions to prevent online harms, and we heard from Simon some of the examples of the sort of work that we would be expecting companies to bring forward, and also government's role in supporting users. In order to get a little bit more information on some of our specific provisions, we launched a consultation in order to get better input to before we develop some of the more detailed points. So the strategy is split into 3 main chapters. Firstly, support for children, parents and carers. And this is really about the kind of the education piece that we can provide as government to children. The Children's Social Work Act is introducing compulsory relationship and sex education for primary and secondary school students in England, respectively. And the Department for Education will be consulting on whether PSHE should be brought forward as a compulsory subject. We are working very, very closely with the DfE in developing those consultations and the curricula, because we've already announced that online safety will play a very fundamental point in all of those different curricula. We're also very interested in the role that peer-to-peer online safety can play. Simon mentioned the scheme that they're rolling out with all secondaries to have digital safety ambassadors in all secondary schools in the UK, which we warmly welcome. We were told explicitly by children that they prefer to get their advice on online safety from each other and from people who've already experienced it. And we see this as a really, really valuable role in making sure that that conversation is really happening in schools and making sure that this information is not just top down from parents, from teachers, from government. And then finally, we'll be asking UKIS to do a review of literature for parents, and Baroness Kidron touched on some of these points in her talk, which is that this kind of fallacy of the digital native, whereby actually just because you as a parent don't understand how to use Snapchat in the same way as your 14-year-old doesn't mean that you don't have an awful lot to tell them about how to make judgments online, what is right, how to tell what is right or wrong online, how to resist pressure online, and really all of the sorts of things that come with a mature adult brain and the ability to make judgments. So actually giving parents the confidence to have those conversations from an early age. The second part of our strategy is based on working with industry to make online environments safer for all users. As part of the Digital Economy Act, which received royal assent in April this year, the Secretary of State is required to bring forward a code of practice for all social media companies to address harmful conduct on their platforms. We are consulting on this code of practice, and we're hoping to build on the Royal Foundation work that many of the tech companies have been involved in. I know Baroness Kidron has also served on that board, to really build on that and bring forward a code of practice that tackles online safety at its very broadest. Secondly, the Conservative Manifesto committed to bringing forward a social media levy, and we're consulting on what that might look like. And thirdly, we're seeking to work with companies to provide far more transparency in annual transparency reports. One of the things that we found when developing the strategy was that we didn't have that much evidence in terms of how regularly things were going wrong online, and what we would really like is a little bit more transparency, slightly more metrics in order to bring forward any more targeted future policy interventions. Finally, we're looking at how tech can improve online safety for all users. I mean, government is not always best placed in this space to figure out how technology can drive safety. That is why the best and brightest engineering minds are working for the companies themselves. We're really throwing the challenge to those companies to say, how can you tell the startups what they need to know about online safety? What did you learn from your experiences of bringing an app and scaling it that you can pass on to the next big online and social media community? We see people, sort of major companies like Snapchat, having to kind of rework online reporting into their platforms long after launch. How can we be having those conversations with startups from the very start so that they understand that actually it's in their business model's interest to be thinking about safety before they even launch, so that they're not going to have to retrofit this in the wake of sort of bad publicity about online safety risks to children. So just to wrap things up, I'm going to explain how the strategy fits into our wider digital charter, which was also a commitment from the Conservative Manifesto. The idea behind the Charter is that internet and digital technologies are a powerful force for good, driving economic growth, shared prosperity and positive social change. But there is a feeling generally that technology has run ahead of society and citizens have legitimate concerns about threats that are emerging. I think we've seen this today in the debates so far. The Digital Charter is the government's response to this. Its objective is to ensure new technologies work for the benefit of everyone, all citizens and all businesses. Through the Charter, we will develop policies and actions that make the UK the safest and fairest place to be online and drive innovation and growth across the economy. This cannot be achieved by government alone. Citizens, businesses, charities and others all have a role to play. And the Charter will be an iterative, ongoing process to respond to the opportunities and challenges brought about by new technologies, developing a shared understanding of the rights and responsibilities of citizens and businesses and putting them into practice.